Hi, we're ready to begin. Today, our Tech Talk pattern features in NX. Our presenter today is Bilal. He's a graduate of the University of Cincinnati with a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering Technology, with a strong background in manufacturing, design analysis, CNC programming, and 3D printing. He was nominated for the 2024 MET Graduate of the Year for their contributions as a mentor and enthusiasm towards challenges. He worked on the Formula team since his freshman year and rounded out his senior year as the team lead for the Formula Electric Racing team. Bilal, the Tech Talk is now yours.
All right, thank you very much for the lovely introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mohammad Bilal Syed. I'm an NX CAD applications engineer here at Prolim. I've had about 3 years in design, 1 year as a machinist and fabrication technician, and as Vicky mentioned, spent all 5 years on the Formula team at UC. So let's jump right into it. So overall, we're going to have a short presentation that goes over what's new in the NX pattern features since NX 8. An in-depth look at the pattern feature dialog, key features like pattern face, pattern geometry, pattern body, and pattern component. Then we will end off on some live examples to demonstrate these features and actions. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll address them during the Q&A session at the end. All right. So prior to NX8, pattern feature was called instance feature, and there have been a lot of enhancements since our last tech talk on this topic. So the biggest ones since 1899, NX 1899, simple is now the default pattern method, and you can now select multiple features to pattern and output as a single feature. Symbolic threads can also be applied to one or more features at once rather than just one at a time. And then on the pattern face has now has the copy threads option, similar to pattern geometry. It lets you copy symbolic threads to instance faces that look the same as the source face, which is useful for copy bodies in CAM and drafting applications. Renew feature adds symbolic threads to a legacy pattern face feature as well. In the pattern geometry, the renew feature now updates legacy pattern geometry features to the current NX version, and any feature changes are reflected in the renewed feature as well. Editing of a legacy feature utilizes the legacy UI, and the feature is updated in that version as well. On the pattern body side, the pattern body command, you can use the pattern body command to create a pattern from a solid body that you select, and then combine the solid bodies in the pattern into a single body. After selecting a solid body to pattern, you can specify a reference point to determine the location for the pattern body. Select whether to create the pattern in a circular, linear, or helical layout. You can then specify different options to define each layout, and then such as the direction vector, rotation axis, and spacing. And I'll go over why you would want to use it over just your traditional Unite. Then we have our pattern component, which was added to the structure designer. And I believe there have been some enhancements on the assemblies side as well. So the pattern component command is used to create a linear array of features in one or two directions. The pattern feature can be associative or non-associative and are included in a consolidated version of structure assembly. You can pattern the following to make copies. One of them is structures, frame members, individual features such as gussets, mounting feet, and stiffeners, and then groups of features such as vertical members and their mounting feet. Then there's also automatic feature patterning, which was added to Structure Designer, which is you can use the patterning tab in the Structure Designer Preferences dialog box to specify which features can be automatically patterned. Automatic patterning occurs when you add a new feature to a Structure Designer object after that object is already patterned. Okay. So now let's explore what the pattern feature does. So it allows you to, as it says, it allows you to copy features into patterns with control over your layout types, which is like your linear, circular, polygon, spiral, and more, and your boundary definitions, which is your face, curve, and exclude options. And I'll be showing how to use those in the demo portion. You may also use spreadsheets to place your pattern or even increment certain parameters as they get patterned. Each layout serves specific needs, whether it's a simple linear pattern or a complex helical path. I'm gonna turn on my laser pointer. Oh, word. So you may notice that in the pattern feature, if you're new to NX, you might be wondering what these asterisks are. Just like an online form, these mean that they are required to be filled out for it to execute the command. So as always, if you are new to NX, or if you ever get stuck and don't really know how to properly use the command in NX, hit the F1 key on your keyboard for help. So this will open a self-help window on your sidebar, or take you to the Siemens website for more in-depth information. Some companies have a firewall that prevents you from going there, so you may get routed to the Siemens website, or sometimes your NX can kind of glitch out. So just be wary of that. Now, boundary definition. So boundary definition is a powerful tool that ensures patterns don't interfere with objects nearby. And here's what you can do. So you can define boundaries using face edges, sheet edges, or sketch curves. And you can use the exclude option to remove certain areas from the patterning process. Be cautious though. Unexpected results can occur if the centroid of a pattern lies outside of the defined boundary. And what I mean by centroid is, if I turn on my little laser pointer, are these. This is telling you where the center of the pattern is going to be. All right. So the next thing I'm going to discuss is pattern along. This is a type of layout. So this tool allows you to associatively position objects relative to a path at defined point locations. It's particularly useful for components that need to follow a curve with proper orientation. What's exciting is the enhanced point selection intent, which ensures seamless referencing of feature points along a path. So here's a quick demonstration. So I have created a spline, added a point set to it. Now I'm going to go into my pattern geometry, select the pattern that I want to pattern essentially, select the points, and you can see I have now created a lovely moving or dynamic pattern, as well as if I change it, it changes the number of that entity on that pattern. So if as you saw me do, I changed it from 4 points to 8 points, and you saw 8 ski jumpers on that slope. Now, the pattern body command. So this feature lets you generate a combined pattern output body from an input body. This is especially effective for linear, circular, or helical patterns. So do note that pattern bodies must have coincident matching faces. If they don't, NX will be upset at you. Essentially, it'll say, hey, there are gaps in this. I can't really combine this together, because essentially this pattern body is to generate a combined patterned output body from an input cell body. So you can see in this instance, or in the photo that I have, we're going to go over a much simpler model. But in this instance, you can see I have this nice little filter that we started off with that one cell, and then we circular patterned it all the way up to make this giant filter. Now, it's time for the live demo. All right, can you all see my NX screen over here? I'll take that as a yes. All right, so to start off, I've created a couple very simple models. The first thing I'm going to show you is just how to do your pattern feature, how to do a normal feature to pattern. So as I mentioned, you have these asterisks. I'm going to change this back to linear. So you can see I have these asterisks. These are just saying, hey, these need to be filled out in order for me to execute the command. So I will choose the feature that I want to select. I can choose in this case, it's showing both the symbolic thread. If I hover over it for 3 seconds without moving my mouse, you'll see these 3 dots appear. If I click on it, you can now, oh, well, it's off the screen, but over here, NX is smart enough to tell you, hey, what are you trying to select? So you can choose extrude number 2 or this, or you can select them both as well. In this instance, I'm just going to use extrude 2 just for simplicity, and then specify the vector where you want this dimension to go since it is linear. So I'll just select this edge, and now we'll go over different spacings. So we have count and pitch, which is your default. Whenever you open up pattern feature for the first time, this is most likely going to be your default. And so this essentially tells you how many entities or how many times do you want this to be patterned, including the one that you've already selected, and at what distance do you want each of them to be. You can also choose symmetric, which will then, if it shows up a little bit better, if I zoom out, you can see that it pushes it back 2. So in this case, we don't want it to be symmetric because we want our pattern to stay on the body itself. And if I hit show result, you can see very simple, very easy to do as well. Then I can choose count and span. I personally like to use this just because it simplifies. It just works better in my head, in my opinion. You can have the span distance, which is from the first feature to the middle of the last feature, and how many do you want in between. So I can change this to 5, and you'll see 5 instances of it. And if I show the result, you'll see 5 instances of it. All right. Then we also have our pitch and span, which is how far you want each of these to be and what's your span distance. So if I change this to 50, you can see that it only gives me 4 because only 4 of those features can fit within that pitch distance within that span. But now if I change this to 200, now you can see the last one shows up at the very edge. All right, I'm going to change this back to count and span. Gonna leave this at 4 and 180. And if you ever want to use a second direction, which in this case, this is a linear direction, oftentimes we're either doing, square patterns, rectangular patterns, or as it mentions, very linear patterns, you can select direction 2. And as I said, the asterisk pops up and it asks you which direction you want to go to. Now, as you can see, it thinks I want to take this pattern off to this side. However, I don't want to do that. What can I do about that? Well, you can either click this button over here, which says reverse direction, or you can double click the vector itself. And you can see as I hover over it, it says double click to reverse, and it reverses. In NX, if it has a handle, which this is a handle, you can pull and push, or you can input the number directly, as I just showed you. In this case, I'm happy with the count and pitch being 2. In fact, I'm going to change the count and span, and that looks good to me. So I'm going to hit show result, and you can see all of them show up. I'm going to hit apply now. All right, now I'm going to hop over to a different model, and I'm going to show you the circular, helical, and other pattern features that are here. So I'm going to go back to pattern feature, select the pattern that I want to, select the feature that I want to pattern, go to circular, and now I can specify, and now I can specify the vector. In this case, I already have a hole in the middle. So in fact, I'm actually going to go back to my first feature, and I'm going to actually select this one because it'll be easier to demonstrate on this. So I'll go back, select my circular hole or my circular pattern, select the hole feature. Now you can see it asks me for a rotation axis and specifying a vector and specifying a point. So I'll select this. I'll say I want it to rotate about the z-axis, so I'll click on that. And now I'll specify the point. Over here I have a sketch with just a point, which is where I want it to be, and I've selected that. Now you can see I have a circular pattern already made, and similarly, you can have your count and pitch, you can have your count and span, etc. I'll just keep it at that. Then you can have your concentric pattern. So let's say if in this instance, this is a circular pattern, if you want it to be concentric, or you want to have concentric patterns, so rather than, doing a linear pattern one way and then having it like, a circular pattern of all three of those features, you can do it all in one. So I'll click this, which is radiate. So create concentric members. You can include the first circle, which would just get rid of it or would keep it. In this case, I'll just keep it in there. And then similarly, count and pitch, count and span, pitch and span. And then there's a list as well, which defines the spacing by a list of values and a count, which you can do as well. So if I show the result, you'll see it inputs all of the holes that I need, and it's rather quick too. Now I'm going to show you guys the polygon feature, or the polygon layout. Similar to the circular pattern definition, you select a vector upon which you want it to rotate. In this case, I'll select this z-axis and specify the point. I'll choose the same point. And now you can see I've already started to create a polygon. In this instance, let's say if I said I want, a pentagon. So these are the number of sides of your polygon. This is the count per side or pitch alongside. So then this would then, put an instance of that feature that you're trying to pattern at this distance specifically. And of course, you can even have it go halfway. So now I can have, half of a pentagon in this instance, or I can have half of a hexagon in this instance too. So I'm going to go back to count per side. I'm going to keep it at 6. And of course, change this back to 180. You can also just, pull this and I'll do exactly what you need it to do. And I'll say I want 4 per side. And if I hit, apply or show result, you can see I've created a hexagonal pattern. Now, what if I wanted to create a spiral pattern? Now I'll go back over here because this is going to be easier to show you guys on this one. I'll go to the pattern feature, specify the hole that I want to pattern, make sure that my definition is spiral, specify the plane normal. So in this case, I want it to be on this face. And then the reference vector, it's asking me how/where do I want the spiral to go. In this instance, I want it just to rotate about this. And you can see already I have a spiral layout. Now, the spiral command is a little bit more complex. It has a lot more drop downs. It has a lot more ways to define it. So you can have a left-hand spiral or a right-hand spiral. You can have it defined by number of turns or the total angle. I'll keep it at 2 turns. You can change it to 3, and I'm pretty sure this might throw it out of the model as it did. And of course, I'm probably going to come back here, change it back to 2. You can change the pitch, which is how far out you want one of these turns to go. You can see if I make it smaller, then I can add more turns. So I can say, 5 turns. And change this back. Change it back to 40. And then, of course, pitch along spiral, which is after how much of this arc length do I want another instance of that feature. So let's say if I put down 25. Now you can see I have almost double the amount of features instanced in this particular command. And you can see I've created a nice spiral pattern. You can also rotate the angle at which you want the spiral to be facing. Now I'm going to show you guys the helical pattern. So if you go down here, I have this one little hole. I'll go back to my pattern feature, select the feature, which is the hole. Go to helical, or is it helix? Specify the vector as per usual. I will specify, that I want it to rotate around the z-axis, and I'm going to specify a point. Now that point could be, the edge of this, NX is smart enough to realize where you want that point to be. In this instance, because I want it to be all concentric around this one point, I can go to my snap points. If I click on it, you can see I have snap options. You can turn those on or off depending on what you want to do. If, let's say, you wanted the edge of one of the circles, you can click on that. And if I hover over, you can see right here, I can choose the edge. But if I remove that and select this, now if I hover over the edge, it shows me the internal point here where the radius begins. So I'll click on that. I would like the front face. There we go. So in this instance, same thing with the spiral. You can have your right-hand helix or a left-hand helix. It's essentially a spiral that goes three-dimensional and it is at a constant radius. So you can have your count, angle, and turns. I'm actually going to make this wider so that you guys can read a little bit better. So yeah, you can have your count, angle, and distance, which is how many points do you want, how far, and how many turns you want in that particular helix. You can have, there we go, count, which is 40 holes, angle, at what angle do you want them to be, and the distance at which each of them are. Then the span, which is how far out do you want your helix to go, or how far do you want one turn to go. In this instance, I have 5 millimeters, and then the helix span, which is how far up do you want it to go, which is 20. So very similar to the other dropdowns that I've shown you. And then, of course, we have angle, helix, pitch, and span, and then angle, helix, pitch, and turns. I'm going to keep it at this one, and I'm going to hit show result. And you can see very quickly we have our pattern already made. So I'll hit OK. All right. Next up, I'm going to show you guys pattern face. This is a simple castle nut that I made, very simplified, nothing too complex. So I'm going to go to our more, go to our pattern face, select that, and I'm going to select these 3 faces. I want a circular pattern, so I'll select that, specify the vector, which would be, of course, the z-axis, and then specify the point. In this instance, I'll just choose that, and you can see almost immediately it shows me what it's going to look like, or it gives me a preview. In case you don't like previews, you can also toggle that off, and it'll just show you where it's going to be. I do like to see what my NX is doing, so I just keep it on like. And of course, you've got your count and pitch. You've got your count and span, your pitch and span, and list again. If I wanted, let's say 3, I can do that. Now, if I hit 3, but the pitch angle is 60, you're going to see that it's not happy. Well, it's still doing it, but it's not necessarily happy. It's not exactly what I want. So let's say if I want to add every other face, well, this is where you can start introducing a little bit of formulas. NX is a little smart, I would like to say. So in this instance, let's say if I want it on, let's say every other face, I'll put in 360 and then divide that by 3. And if I hit tab or enter, then you can see it recognizes the value that this is going to be rather than actually inputting that value. And there we have it. Now it's on every other face. It's divided that pitch angle to 120 each. Now, of course, if you can put this in as an expression, and I will talk about that soon. But in this instance, this is just a quick and easy and very dirty way of doing it. And of course, if I hit 6, it's going to give me a error saying that, hey, we can't put 6 with 120 pitch. They're starting to coincide with each other. It's not making sense, which is why I just like to change this number to 6. And this is where, you could put your count as an expression labeled n, and then you can put your pitch angle as 360 over n. This is really unnecessary. It's if you want to do a lot of parametric modeling. I personally do it a lot of parametric modeling just on my own personal projects, just because I find it quicker and easier, but you also don't need to do it. Not many people actually use expressions a whole lot in the industry. It's really up to you guys. It's really up to what you want to do and what your preferences are. So I'll hit apply. You can see I've made my castle nut. Now, I'm going to go back to my first model, and I'm going to show you the boundary definitions. So I will come back here. In fact, I'm going to edit with rollback just for simplicity. And I'm going to change this to, let's say I want 10 of these, and then I want 10 over here. But let's say, I have this, entire patterned out face, but I want an exclusion zone. I don't want anything to be in there. Well, how can I do that? Well, you can do that using the boundary definition. So I click underneath the layout. You can see boundary, which is none. You can choose a face, so it'll only pattern within that face. You can choose a curve, and you can choose an exclude, which will also use a curve to kind of put out a keep out zone, essentially. So I'm actually going to unhide this curve that I have over here. And then I'll say, I only want my pattern to be within this curve. And now the asterisk shows up of saying, hey, I need to know that curve. You can have connected features or single curve. This is your filters. You can also do infer curves. I personally like to keep it on connected curves. And then you can see I now have I only have that feature within that zone. Now, you may also notice that I have a handle here. Well, that's your margin distance. Let's say if I want it to be a little bit further in, I can pull that in, or I can even pull it out negative to, have it a little bit more further out. And of course, just as I mentioned earlier, you can choose whether you want to drag the handle or whether you want to just type in a value. I'll just keep it there. And of course, if I go down and hit show result, it'll show you just this extruded pattern inside that curve. Now, what if I wanted to exclude it from this? What if I didn't want it to be in there at all? Well, it's the same method. You can click on that, and now you can see I have my margin distance. I can pull it in or pull it out, and it will work regardless. So if I go down, hit show result, you can see my pattern is excluded from this zone. All right. So I'm going to take this back to our normal zone of 5 and 2. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to hide this again. Now what I'm going to show you guys is pattern increments. Now, let's say you have this particular extrusion and it needs to stair step, or there's some sort of change, or it needs to follow a pattern within that pattern. So rather than, doing a singular extrusion every single time, and that this increment that it is going to be constant, you can absolutely do that within the pattern feature command. So if I go back, you don't have to edit with rollback. You can also do this with a new feature. I'm just doing it just because it's quicker, or it's smoother for me to show you guys this way. So I can go down and you can see pattern increment. If I click on that, it shows me this little area, which opens up essentially a little expressions box. And you can choose, so this is how it's defined. You can see it has like horizontal distance between arc 1. It has a start limit, basically where that extrusion is starting, and then a perpendicular dimension between another arc. So it's basically telling you the current extrusion is 10 millimeters from this side, 10 millimeters from this side, because that's just how I defined it. And then the end limit, which is again your extrusion. Now, let's say if I wanted this end limit to change, what I'll do is I'll add this into a set, and you can see you can do it different for each direction that you do it. So let's say if I want it to be the same across direction 2, I'll just leave this alone. And now I can add the increment. If I put in 0, nothing's going to happen. Why? Because I'm telling it, hey, I don't want it to increment. I want it to increment by 0 each time. And of course, 0 means nothing, unfortunately, and therefore there would be no added value to that increment. But if I put in 10 and I hit OK, and I go and I show the result, now you'll see that the pattern increases by 10 millimeters or 10 units each time. Now if I undo my result, go back into here, and I can also make it go down. So let's say if I put down -5, and I hit OK, and I show the result. Now you can see it patterns itself down, and I can undo the result. You can also, as I mentioned, you can also change the positioning of this. So in this instance, let's say if I wanted to, let's say if I wanted to keep this moving at, whatever increment, but I wanted direction 2 to be at a different increment, right? So now I have direction 2. Let's say I want this to go up by 10, hit OK. And similar thing, one goes down, the other one should go up. In this instance, we did the opposite of what I wanted to do. Oh, wait, that's because I chose the wrong setup. I chose perpendicular dimension, so it was actually moving the pattern slightly inwards or outwards. I'm going to choose N limit, add that to direction 2. And now this should work. Yep. So it is taking in, so because this feature was patterned the other side, it is also adding a -5 each time I'm trying to use it. So I'll undo that result. Close this out. Okay. So that's a quick demonstration on pattern increments. Now, what if I wanted to use a spreadsheet rather than, these pattern increments? You can absolutely do that. So if I go over here, I can quite literally click on Use Spreadsheet, and it opens up an Excel file on my other screen, which I will pull over here. And you can see one thing to note is it will tell you that if there is no value here, it defaults to 0. So this is something that you guys will have to keep note of, that if you leave a cell blank, it works just like Excel. So you can use Excel formulas in here if you'd like. And if you leave a cell empty or blank, it'll give you a default value of 0. So let's say if I wanted this to be 50, and I wanted this one to be 25, and, random numbers all over the place. And I wanted to implement this, and I hit close. Then I'll say, hey, do you want to save the current spreadsheet data? I'll hit OK. And then if I go to show result, you'll be able to see that implemented on this. Now I'll go back, pull this over here. In this instance, I don't want any of those. I want this to change the offset instead. So instead of 180, I want this to be just 100. And I can change that. Whoa, not 1,000. And similarly, same thing. If I close this, it'll ask me, do I want to save it? I'll say OK. And now I have pulled in my pattern to 100 millimeters offset. All right. I'm going to remove this. I'm going to make sure that everything else is fine. That looks good to me. And I'll hit OK. I'm happy with where it's at right now. Now, how to use expressions. This is a really fun one. As I mentioned, I really like to use expressions just because it's quick, simple, and easy. There are 2 ways you can go about this. One is if you go to your tools, you can see expressions over here. And if you click that, it'll show you a list of expressions. It can get a little confusing, but don't worry. If you go to feature expressions and you select a feature in particular, it'll show you exactly what is being run. Now, if I can just make this a little bit smaller so that you guys can see it a little bit better. Okay. Come over here, my friend. There we go. So you can see I have a formula, I have values, and I have units. So this is, again, the number of instances that I want. So I can change this to, change the formula to 3. And if I hit tab, you'll see that it changes the value, but it doesn't actually apply it. I have to click apply in order for it to actually update. Now you can see I have 3. And if I go back, now this is one way of doing it. It's within the tools command. The way how I prefer to do it, just because it's quicker, it's simpler, and honestly, you don't have to hit apply and then go back every time. If you click on pattern feature, you go down to details, it's the same thing. You can see your expressions and your tools. So if I click on expression, change that to 5 back again and hit tab or enter, you can see it does that pretty quickly. And you can do that with, because I have it as set as pitch and span, you can see that if I increase this, it says span distance, number of copies, span distance, and then the margin. All right. Now what I'll go show you guys is how to do pattern body with a very simplified body. So I'll come over here and you can see I have my nice little almost Swiss cheese over here. Go back to home, click on more, and I'll click on pattern body, which is right there. Select the body. In this instance, I'll choose that. Specify the vector around which I want it to rotate. In this case, I want a circular body, or I want a circular pattern definition. So I'll click on the vector. You can also choose an edge. So I'll choose an edge in this case, and it already understands, or at least it infers, because this is an inferred point, on where I want it to, from what point I want it to rotate around. You can go down and then select different options on where you want that point to be specified. But remember, as I mentioned in the presentation, it has to be coincident. If the faces are not coincident, it'll give you an error. Here's an example. If I change this to, let's say, 180, and I change the angle to 50, it gives me an alert saying each pattern body must be face coincident with another patterned body. Change this back to 20, keep it to 360, and now I have my nice almost Swiss cheese. And again, you can have your spacing as count and pitch. You can have it as count span, and you can do the same thing with pitch and span as well. I'll hit apply, and there we go. Now, I did mention that you can you can pattern a component within assemblies. And this is how you can do it. I really like using patterns in assemblies, especially if you have multiple bolted connections. And remember, you can do things smart, and you can do things a little too smart. And you can cause yourself trouble if you don't really think about all the different, I want to say, edge cases or scenarios that you might be using this. But in this instance, let's say if I have if I have this assembly pattern, or sorry, I have my model back up again. And in this instance, I, have my castle nut, and I want this castle nut to go on each of these bolted extrusions. Now, the biggest thing you have to note is before you pattern the component, you should have the first feature fully defined, or at least constrained how you want it to be constrained, because that's what it's going to go off of. It's going to do exactly that to each and every other one of those components that you're going to pattern. Now, how do I do this within NX? And rather than, going in and doing the whole, setup, or having to figure out what the original parameters were for this particular extrusion, what you can do is go to assemblies, and then over in more, where did I throw it? Oh, sorry. Good Lord. Pattern component. There it is. Select the component I want to pattern. In this instance, is the pattern nut. It had already selected reference, but let's say if I was doing this for the first time, this is what it would look like. If I select the component I want to pattern, it'll say pattern, I'll select what I want. And if I go to reference, NX is smart enough to understand that, hey, it has to be one of the patterns that are already in here. Now, in this instance, it knows that the one that is most relevant to me is this, so it's going to choose that. So I'll hit OK or apply. In this instance, I'll hit OK because that's what I want to do. Now, what happens if, let's say, I add more, or if I take out some of these features? What's going to happen? Because I can see that it's already updated the number of the pattern nuts, and it will show up on your bill of materials as well within your assemblies. But if I go back to this part, go here, select this, go to details, And let's say I want this to be 5 as well, and I hit tab. It appears that I have an exclusion zone already in here. So that's why it's probably not doing that last one, but that's okay. And now I have this. Now, if I go back to my assembly pattern, it's put all of those extra nuts in there, including all those extra. It's updated very quickly or very easily. And if I, let's say, take some out, oops, sorry, not search, go to details. Let's say go back to 2 on this side, and I want 3 instead of 5. And I go back here, it updates. And you can see that also in your assembly navigator, showing that you now have only 6 of these nuts rather than, the 10 that was originally there. All right. So that concludes the live demo. Thank you for attending today's session. To rewatch this webinar or explore some more tips and tricks, visit our YouTube channel at prolim.com. Sorry, at YouTube at Prolim. Make sure to subscribe for the latest on NX CAD if you're into that, or you can also look into Team Center, Solid Edge, among other Siemens related software.